6 months of peace can dull a man's instincts. Tobias Hartwell had almost begun to believe that the worst was behind him, that exposing Marshall Webb's corruption, helping the Apache warrior Ayanna escape unjust execution, and forging a fragile peace between two warring peoples had bought him more than just a season of quiet. He was wrong. The warning came in the form of dust, thick, fast-moving, angry. It rose from the eastern ridge like smoke from a fire that hadn't yet reached him. Tobias squinted toward the horizon. 5 riders moving hard, their horses lathered in sweat. No mailbags, no trade packs, just speed violence and bad news in their saddlebags. Tobias was mending a fence near the creek when he saw it. Chief Takakota's grandfather's war lance leaned gently against the porch rail where Tobias had placed it that morning after brushing the eagle feathers. The lance should have made him proud. It was a symbol of respect. He was the only white man in territorial history honored enough to carry Apache steel. But in that moment, it sent ice down his spine. The riders weren't coming to share a drink. Tobias dropped his hammer, reached for the rifle he'd started carrying again just a week ago. There'd been whispers in town, Deputy Bradley had told him. Strangers asking questions. Men not satisfied with the official story that Marshall Webb's downfall had been lawful, that Ayanna's escape had been justice. The lead rider dismounted 20 feet from the porch. Tall, lean, pale eyes like cold steel. Tobias didn't know him, but he knew the type. The man held something across his saddle, a strip of cloth red with fresh blood, an Apache headband, Ayanna's. The stranger smiled, a cruel thing, all yellow teeth and malice. "You, Tobias Hartwell." "That depends," Tobias said, voice even. "Who's asking?" "Name's Clayton Morrison," the man replied, dismounting with slow confidence. "Colonel Morrison was my brother." Tobias felt his stomach twist. Clayton held up the bloodied headband like it was a trophy. "This belongs to your Apache friend, the one who murdered him." Tobias didn't speak, couldn't. Ayanna had left 3 days ago on a diplomatic mission to the Southern Territories under federal escort. He was supposed to be safe. He was supposed to return tomorrow with news about expanding the peace treaty. But the blood in that cloth said otherwise. "Where is he?" Tobias finally asked. Clayton tilted his head. "Somewhere you'll never find him. Unless, of course, you're willing to make a trade." A silence fell, heavy, suffocating. "You want revenge?" Tobias growled. "I want justice," Clayton said. "The kind you stole when you destroyed my brother's name." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his saddlebag and tossed it at Tobias's feet. "That's a confession. Already written. Just needs your signature." Tobias didn't move. "Confirms you fabricated evidence against my brother Clayton," continued. "Says you conspired with the Apache. That everything Marshall Webb confessed was forced under torture." "And if I sign this," Tobias asked tightly, "then your Indian friend lives," Clayton said with a grin. "We ride away. This whole ugly thing vanishes. And if I don't, then we send you pieces of him. Scalp first." Tobias's fists clenched around the rifle. It was a trap clear as day. Sign the paper and destroy everything he'd fought for. Refuse and Ayanna would bleed for it. "How do I even know he's alive?" he asked. One of Clayton's men reached into his coat and tossed something into the dirt. A leather cord strung with 3 Apache prayer beads. Tobias recognized it instantly. Ayanna's mother had given it to him before she died. "He was wearing that when we took him," the man said. "Still breathing. For now." Clayton stepped closer, towering, just out of reach. "You have 1 hour," he said. "Meet us at Devil's Canyon. Come alone. Bring the signed confession and your friend sees another sunrise. He mounted his horse. Try anything clever, and you'll get what's left of him in the mail. The 5 riders turned as one and galloped off, leaving only hoof prints and fear behind. Tobias stood frozen, a paper at his feet, blood in the dust, and a decision no man should have to make. The canyon's name wasn't metaphor, it was prophecy. Devil's Canyon was a cut in the earth that looked like the sky itself had split it open in fury. Towering red rock walls boxed in narrow ground, leaving no cover, no escape. It was a perfect place for an execution. Tobias Hartwell knew this even as he rode alone, Warlands strapped to his saddle dust trailing behind him like smoke from a burning past. He carried no illusions. Clayton Morrison hadn't arranged a prisoner exchange. He'd arranged a spectacle, a silencing, a final chapter written in blood. The leather cord, with Ayanna's prayer beads, still weighed in Tobias's pocket like a heart torn from a body. It told him Ayanna was alive barely, but Clayton's words still rang like death bells: sign the confession or watch your friend die. It was a cruel choice, one designed to break a man in half. As Tobias approached the canyon's narrow throat, he saw them. 4 riders positioned with precision, 2 behind boulders near the entrance, 1 on the ledge above, and Clayton himself standing 20 feet up, rifle trained downward like a judge from a gallows. A 5th man was unseen, guarding the prisoner likely. Tobias didn't need to see Ayanna to feel his presence. Pain hummed in the air like distant thunder. "You came?" Clayton called, voice echoing through the canyon. "Didn't think you'd be stupid enough, Hartwell." Tobias didn't answer. He rode forward until he reached the spot marked by a cairn of rocks. There he dismounted slowly, arms visible, rifle still slung but untouched. He reached into his coat, not for a weapon, but for the folded piece of paper Clayton had demanded. "I brought your confession," Tobias said evenly, "but you show me Ayanna first." Clayton gave a signal. From the opposite ledge, a shadow emerged, dragging a limp figure into view. Even from a distance, Tobias could see the dried blood in Ayanna's hair, the sluggish breath, the cruel bindings around his wrists. Alive, but not for long. "Now toss it up," Clayton ordered, but Tobias didn't move. "You said he lives if I sign, but you didn't say for how long. You kill him 5 minutes after I sign, who holds you accountable?" Clayton's smile was cold. "You're not in a position to negotiate." "No," Tobias said quietly, "but I'm in a position to think. And I've been thinking, Clayton, about what it really costs to sign that piece of paper." Clayton raised a brow. "Your friend's life is the price. That seems easy to calculate." "No," Tobias said, voice steel. "The price is a war, a new war. That paper clears your brother's name, sure, but it also turns Ayanna into a traitor, the Apache into murderers, and me into a liar. It reignites every fuse we've spent 6 months putting out. You want blood, Clayton, but you'll drown the territory in it." The canyon held its breath. One of the men behind the rocks muttered, "Clay, maybe we shut up." Clayton snapped, then turned his attention back to Tobias. "This isn't about politics, Hartwell. It's personal. You ruined my brother's name. You helped a savage escape justice. And now you're going to fix it." Tobias looked up at Ayanna, barely conscious, body-slumped spirit still somehow intact. This man had risked everything for peace, for honor, for the bond they'd forged beyond skin and tribe. Could he really let him die for the sake of a principle? Then he remembered Chief Takakota's words from long ago. A warrior who fights for peace must choose his battles with wisdom, and sometimes the only weapon left is sacrifice. Tobias took a step forward, eyes never leaving Clayton's. If I sign that confession, he said, I destroy the peace we built. I make the Apache look like conspirators. I make my truth a lie. That piece of paper will undo everything. Clayton shrugged. So don't sign. And he dies. You think that'll be the end of it? Tobias challenged. You kill Ayanna, and the Apache will rise like fire through this land. And when the truth comes out, and it will, you'll be remembered not as a brother defending honor, but as a coward who murdered peace itself. For a moment, silence held them both in place. Tobias saw the flicker in Clayton's eyes. Doubt, not of purpose, but of control. The kind of tremor that appears when a plan begins to crack under its own weight. Then Clayton smiled again, slower this time. You've got guts, Hartwell. I'll give you that. But guts don't keep a man alive. He pointed to the paper in Tobias's hand. 1 hour left. We wait at Devil's Ridge. Bring it signed. Come alone. And pray your friend doesn't bleed out while we're waiting. With that, he remounted and galloped away, his men following like carrion birds chasing a dying deer. Tobias stood alone once more in the canyon's throat, Ayanna's silhouette barely visible now as the shadows stretched longer. His hands were steady, but inside the war had already begun. He could feel the stakes, friendship, truth, peace all stacked like dry kindling, waiting for a single spark. He looked down at the confession in his hand. A paper coffin, a death warrant, a war cry. He folded it and slid it back into his coat. Then he turned and walked toward his horse. He had less than an hour to find help, summon hope, and stop a massacre before it began. Tobias Hartwell rode hard through the dusk, the wind clawing at his coat, the warlance at his side rattling like the echo of war drums. The shadows of Devil's Canyon still haunted his thoughts. But what burned hotter was the cold certainty he couldn't outgun them, and he wouldn't outbleed them. If Ayanna were to be saved and the fragile peace preserved, it had to be done with precision, not power. He had less than an hour. The trail bent low into the valley toward town. Main Street was quiet, the lamps just flickering to life as the sun sank beyond the hills. A few townsfolk looked up as Tobias thundered past, their faces etched with wary awe. They'd long since stopped whispering about the white man with the Apache lance. He had become something more than myth, but less than safe. Respect earned in blood often carried the stench of danger. He found Deputy Bradley at the sheriff's office, hunched over a stack of wanted posters. The young lawman's eyes widened as Tobias burst in dust and urgency, clinging to every word. They've got Ayanna. Bradley stood. Who Clayton Morrison, Tobias said, and 4 armed men. They're holding him in Devil's Canyon, and they've given me 1 hour to sign a false confession or he dies. Bradley's hand instinctively moved toward his revolver. We'll get Sheriff Mackenzie. Form a posse. No time, Tobias cut in, and no guns. If we move on them with force, Ayanna dies before we're close. They want me alone. But I need help, quiet help. Bradley narrowed his eyes. What do you need? Tobias pulled a folded scrap of paper from his coat and scribbled a message in haste. The writing, sharp slanted, urgent. When he finished, he folded it once more and pressed it into Bradley's hand. Take this to Miguel Santos at the trading post. Tell him it's from Brother Wolf. He'll know what it means. He can get word to Chief Takakota. Bradley looked at the paper, then back at Tobias. What does it say? That the white brother needs help, that the speaker of peace has been taken, and if the Apache want to prevent war, they must move now. Bradley nodded grimly, then started for the door. "One more thing," Tobias added. "Send word to Fort Richardson. Tell them a federal diplomat's life is at stake." The deputy hesitated. "If this works, it'll bring in cavalry war parties and federal eyes. We won't be able to contain it." Tobias looked him dead in the eye. "Then we won't contain it. We'll end it." Bradley left, disappearing into the growing night like a man sent to chase thunder. Tobias stood alone for a moment in the quiet, then stepped out and swung into the saddle again. He rode west this time toward the canyon and toward the trap. He was going in alone, just as they demanded. But he wouldn't be going in unarmed, not with the truth, not with time, not with faith. As the landscape opened into jagged silhouettes and starlight, Tobias reviewed every piece of the plan in his mind. Bradley would reach Miguel within 20 minutes. Miguel, a trusted intermediary between the settlers and Apache, would know exactly what Brother Wolf meant. It was the name Takakota's people had given Tobias, earned in blood, cemented in loyalty. That message would reach the Apache warriors. And if all went right, they'd arrive unseen, just as they had 6 months ago when Marshal Webb tried to execute Ayanna under a false charge. But this time, Tobias wasn't just a witness to betrayal. He was bait. As he reached the edge of the Devil's Canyon ridgeline, he dismounted and let his horse graze quietly in the brush. The air was unnaturally still. No wind, no birds, no life, just the canyon ahead yawning like a mouth waiting to devour whatever fool wandered in. Tobias tightened the straps on his coat, checked his revolver fully loaded, and slung the warlance across his back. Not to fight, but to signal. A symbol of unity or defiance depending on who was watching. He moved forward alone, boots crunching on dry stone, eyes sharp. This wasn't suicide, it was strategy. Clayton Morrison expected a broken man, a desperate one, someone who would crawl into the canyon clutching a lie just to save a friend. What he was getting instead was a warrior armed with the truth, backed by shadows and ready to stake everything on honor. As the canyon loomed ahead, Tobias whispered to himself, "No matter what happens, Ayanna, you will not die alone. Not today. Not while I breathe." Devil's Canyon lived up to its name. The entrance narrowed like a noose carved between towering red rock walls that cast long, jagged shadows over the earth. Silence ruled here, no birds, no wind, just the slow echo of Tobias Hartwell's boots against the stone. Every step forward felt like stepping deeper into a grave. But he walked anyway. At his back, the warlance. Across his chest, a folded letter, the truth written in haste but heavy with consequence. In his holster, a revolver, fully loaded, a last resort. Clayton Morrison was already in place. Perched 20 feet up on a rock ledge, Clayton stood like a vulture watching a dying animal. His rifle rested loosely in his arms, but his stance was confident, relaxed, dangerous. 3 of his men were visible, one crouched behind a boulder at the canyon entrance, another half hidden behind a jagged outcrop near the middle, the third guarding the upper rim, likely covering any escape routes. The 4th was nowhere in sight, which meant one thing: he was with Ayanna. Right on time, Clayton called down, voice echoing, "I was beginning to think you didn't care about your Apache friend. I care." Tobias said, his tone even. "That's why I'm here, alone, like you asked." Clayton chuckled. "And do you have my confession?" Tobias reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "I have a letter, one that tells the truth. Every name, every motive, every lie. If anything happens to me today, it goes to the federal marshal, the territorial governor, and the Santa Fe Gazette. There are already copies." A flicker passed through Clayton's expression. Surprise, then annoyance. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Tobias held the letter higher. "This document names you, details your plan, your threat, the kidnapping of a federal diplomat under escort. It ties you to the network your brother worked for the war profiteers who wanted this territory to burn." Clayton's mouth twitched. His men shifted slightly behind their covers, uncertainty creeping into their silence. "Let me see Ayanna," Tobias said firmly. Clayton gave a signal. From the opposite ledge, the missing gunman appeared, dragging a figure into view. Ayanna, bound, battered, but breathing. Blood matted his hair and his head hung low, but he was alive. Tobias felt something loosen in his chest, but only slightly. "You've seen him," Clayton barked. "Now throw the confession." "This isn't a negotiation," Tobias said. "It's a reckoning." Clayton snarled. "You self-righteous bastard. You think words will save him?" Tobias didn't flinch. "I think the right words at the right time with the right witnesses can change everything." And then came the sound that changed everything. A sharp twang, then a splintering crack. Clayton's rifle flew from his hands, struck by an arrow from somewhere high above. Before he could recover, another arrow buried itself in the shoulder of the man holding Ayanna. The gunman staggered, cried out, and released his grip. Ayanna slumped to the ground. "Get down," one of the gunmen shouted. But it was too late. From the canyon rims above, Apache warriors appeared like ghosts from stone, silent, swift, deadly. Only 6 of them, but positioned perfectly. Bows drawn, eyes unblinking, each one with a clear line of sight on a target below. Chief Takakota's voice echoed through the canyon, deep and resonant. "Clayton Morrison, you have violated the peace treaty. You have taken our speaker. This is your only warning." Clayton's face turned a shade paler. "They were never supposed to get here this fast," he muttered. Tobias stepped forward slowly. "I told you, Clayton, I didn't come here alone. I came with truth, and with people who protect it." The men around Clayton began to falter. One glanced toward the rim, then to Clayton. Another dropped his rifle and raised both hands. Clayton's hand moved toward his boot, reaching for a hidden pistol. "Don't," Tobias warned. "This ends with surrender, or with you dying here." Clayton froze. More hoofbeats sounded from beyond the canyon. Not Apache ponies this time. Iron shoes. Federal cavalry. Deputy Bradley's voice rang out from the canyon mouth. "We've got 20 men on horseback and another dozen on the way. Clayton Morrison, lay down your weapons and release the prisoner." Clayton looked around, surrounded by enemies, his plan unraveling, his lies exposed, and still, the madness didn't leave his eyes. "You think this ends with peace," he spat. "My brother's name was worth more than any of you." In a flash, he grabbed his boot pistol, not to shoot Tobias, not even the Apache, but aimed at his own man, the one still guarding Ayanna. "Cut his throat," he screamed, "or I'll shoot you myself." But he never got the chance. Tobias moved in a blur, drawing the warlance from his back and hurling it with everything he had. The weapon flew like lightning, eagle feathers, streaming iron tip gleaming, and struck the attacker square in the chest, knocking him off the ledge in a heap of blood and silence. Clayton swung his pistol toward Tobias, but the shot that rang out wasn't his. Deputy Bradley's bullet struck Clayton through the heart. The canyon fell silent. Guns dropped. The remaining men surrendered. Ayanna, barely conscious, was carried to safety by 2 Apache warriors. Tobias walked slowly to retrieve his warlance. Its shaft now stained, its purpose fulfilled. He looked up to where the chief stood, eyes fierce but proud. This time, Tobias whispered, "We fought with words, not war." The chief nodded. and Devil's Canyon, once the stage for an execution, had become a place of justice instead. For a single breath, Devil's Canyon froze in time. The Apache warriors stood poised above bows, drawn shadows etched into the blood-red cliffs. Deputy Bradley held his rifle steady at the canyon entrance, eyes fixed on his mark. And Tobias Hartwell. He stood in the center of it all, heart pounding like war drums, watching Clayton Morrison unravel. Clayton's face was twisted in rage, his plan in ruins, his reputation exposed, his leverage fading fast. But desperation was always more dangerous than strategy, and Clayton still had one final play. "You think this is over?" He snarled, blood on his teeth, madness in his eyes. "You think you've won?" Tobias didn't answer. He just stared, Warland's grip tight, every muscle coiled. "My brother Clayton hissed was worth 10 of your savage friends, and I'll be damned if I let him go to the grave branded a traitor." With lightning speed, Clayton dropped into a crouch and pulled a pistol from his boot, not aiming at Tobias, not at the Apache, not even at Bradley. He turned the weapon on his own man, the one standing behind Ayanna, with a knife at the prisoner's throat. Bobby Clayton screamed, "Cut his throat, or I'll put a bullet in your spine." The threat was insane, suicidal, but that made it more real. Bobby, the scarred man holding Ayanna, froze his blade trembling inches from Ayanna's skin. His eyes darted between the captive and his deranged leader. "Clay." "What are you doing? Do it," Clayton roared. "We kill him now. No witnesses, no evidence." Tobias felt time slow, felt it fracture. His eyes locked on Ayanna, bleeding bound, barely breathing. Bobby's knife inched forward. Ayanna's head slumped, unaware of how close death had come. No more time. Tobias threw the war lance. He didn't aim with his hand, he aimed with his soul. Every ounce of pain, every drop of loyalty, every sacred promise poured into that throw. The weapon cut through the air like a streak of vengeance, its eagle feathers streaming, its polished iron tip flashing in the dying light. It hit Bobby square in the chest, knocking him off the ledge. The knife spun from his hand. His scream echoed for a moment, then ended abruptly as his body hit the canyon floor. Ayanna collapsed alive, saved by inches and seconds. But Clayton was already turning pistol-raised hate, burning in his pale eyes. "You!" he shouted. The sound of the gunshot rang out like a thunderclap. Deputy Bradley had fired first. Clayton's body jerked back as the bullet tore through his chest right over his heart. His pistol slipped from his grasp. He staggered backward, mouth open in disbelief, and dropped like a sack of stone. Dead before he hit the ground. The canyon fell into stunned silence. The remaining two gunmen exchanged glances. One dropped his rifle. The other raised both hands and stepped away from his cover. The Apache archers above didn't release their strings, but they didn't need to. The battle was over before it began. Bradley rushed forward, rifle still in hand but no longer raised. He looked at Tobias, then at the fallen Warlands buried in the chest of Bobby's corpse. "Hell of a throw," he muttered. Tobias didn't answer. He was already sprinting toward Ayanna, who now lay motionless in the dust. Two Apache warriors descended quickly from above, reaching him just as Tobias did. "He's breathing," one said in Apache. "Shallow, but strong." Ayanna opened one eye, blood caked to his cheek. He blinked at Tobias, then smiled faintly. "Brother Wolf," he whispered, voice ragged. "You came." "Always," Tobias said, kneeling beside him. "Family protects family." Bradley looked back toward the canyon's mouth as the sound of hooves grew louder. A platoon of Federal cavalry thundered in their uniforms, flashing in the sunset. Their commander raised a hand, signaling halt. "You're late," Bradley called. The officer, Captain Hayes, dismounted, assessing the scene in a glance. Bodies, surrendered gunmen, an Apache diplomat barely alive, a white rancher with blood on his hands and honor in his eyes. "What the hell happened here?" he asked. Tobias stood slowly lifting his war lance from Bobby's body. The feathers were still intact. The point still gleamed. He looked at Hayes and said only one thing: justice. 3 weeks after the blood dried in Devil's Canyon, the full storm began to break. The federal investigation, led by Captain William Hayes, swept across the Southwest like wildfire through dry brush. Files were seized, ledgers uncovered, coded telegrams deciphered, and what they revealed was far worse than any of them had imagined. Clayton Morrison had not acted alone. He had been just one gear in a vast, well-oiled machine, a network of war profiteers, arms dealers, and corrupt officials. Their goal was simple: restart the Apache Wars and reap the fortune that came with it. More rifles sold, more ammunition shipped, more military contracts signed in Washington by men who never set foot on red earth or looked a warrior in the eye. Tobias Hartwell learned the truth on a cold October morning. Captain Hayes rode out to his ranch, dismounting with a folder thick with names and guilt. The man's face, hardened by years of government service, now carried a new kind of weight disgust. "We found Clayton's accounts," Hayes said, accepting a cup of coffee on Tobias's porch. "Payments traced to weapons manufacturers in Connecticut, ammunition firms in Baltimore, rail contracts signed by men in Chicago who never knew his brother's name but funded his mission all the same." Tobias said nothing. He stared at the horizon where his cattle grazed peacefully, unaware of how close war had come to returning. They were going to use Ayanna Hayes continued. His death, staged as an Apache ambush on a federal diplomat, would have given them all the excuse they needed. Soldiers would be sent in, treaties torn up, entire tribes relocated or wiped out, and the ones behind it, they would have been praised as protectors of the territory. "And what now?" Tobias asked. "Now," Hayes said grimly, "we finish what you started." The names kept coming: a territorial judge who suppressed key documents, a sheriff who lost evidence, even a deputy marshal who falsified reports. The scope was staggering. At the center of it all stood the ghost of Colonel Morrison, the man Tobias had exposed months ago. His brother Clayton had tried to avenge him, but the real motive had never been justice. It had always been control. Control of land, of tribes, of truth. But something had broken that chain. A rancher with a conscience, a warrior with courage, and a piece of paper that held the truth. 1 week later, a courier arrived at Tobias's ranch with a sealed envelope. The letterhead bore the insignia of the White House. Captain Hayes returned again, this time, not with suspicion or orders, but with something Tobias never expected: honor. The president himself signed this, Hayes said, handing over the document. "It's a federal commendation for your service in preserving peace between the United States and the Apache Nation." Tobias read the words slowly. His hands shook, but that wasn't all. "This also comes with an offer," Hayes continued. "You're being appointed federal Indian agent for the Southwest Territory. It's not just a title. It means you'll work with tribal leaders to oversee treaty enforcement, prevent corruption, and ensure something like this never happens again." Tobias blinked. "They trust me to do that." "Not yet," Hayes said, smiling slightly. "There's a condition. Chief Takakota must approve it." As if summoned by name, the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the land. A ceremonial procession of Apache elders approached the ranch, 20 strong, led by Takakota himself. Behind him rode Ayana, fully healed, carrying a new war lance, its shaft unblemished, its feathers bright. They dismounted in silence. Chief Takakota stepped forward and spoke in perfect English. "Brother Wolf," he said, "you risked your life for our son, for our peace. Now we must speak of your future." The circle that formed on Tobias's land that day was sacred. Each elder spoke not just of what Tobias had done, but of who he had become, a man of two worlds, a bridge between enemies, a guardian of children yet unborn. Finally, Chief Takakota raised the second war lance and presented it to Tobias. 6 months ago, the chief said, "We gave you the lance of a warrior. Today, we offer you the lance of a peace chief. Accept it, and you do not walk between our people. You stand for them." Tobias hesitated only a moment, then took the lance with both hands. "I accept," he said. The air was crisp the morning Tobias Hartwell stood between two worlds, his boots on Apache earth, a document in his hand, sealed by the most powerful office in the United States. Word had already spread through the territory like wildfire. The president had issued a personal commendation. A letter, written on heavy parchment, bearing the gold-embossed seal of the White House, now rested on Tobias's table, beside a folded war lance and an eagle feather. Captain Hayes had been the one to deliver it. "You've done more than most men in Washington ever will," Hayes said as they stood on the porch overlooking the valley. "You stopped a war before it started. You exposed corruption that ran from this canyon all the way to the Capitol, and you did it without firing the first shot." Tobias didn't speak. He was still turning over the weight of the second document. Hayes had brought an official offer from the federal government, a permanent role. Federal Indian Agent Hayes repeated, "For the entire Southwest Territory. You'd be the voice between tribal nations and Washington. You'd help enforce treaties, block corruption, and protect the peace you risked your life for." Tobias looked down at the papers again. His hands were rough-scarred from years of ranch work and battles fought with both fists and words. He hadn't asked for this. He wasn't a politician or a general. "I'm just a rancher," he said quietly. "You were," Hayes said. "Now you're something else." But even with the president's signature on the page, the appointment wouldn't mean a thing without the tribe's blessing. Hayes made that clear. "This isn't just a title we hand out," he added. "You've walked with these people, bled with them, but they need to speak for themselves." As if called by fate, the sound of horses approached the ranch. A procession of Apache elders emerged from the tree line, riding slowly, solemnly. Chief Takakota led them adorned in full ceremonial regalia, his white hair braided with beads and feathers. Beside him rode Ayana, fully healed, carrying something wrapped in doeskin. Behind them came the youth of the tribe children Tobias had taught to plant crops, to build shelters, to trust a man with pale skin who never broke his word. When they dismounted, Chief Takakota did not speak right away. Instead, the elders formed a circle in the clearing surrounding Tobias in silence. Then the chief stepped forward. 6 months ago, we gave you the lance of a warrior," he said in English, his voice strong and sure. "You earned it not by killing, but by protecting, by giving water to a dying man, by throwing that same lance to save a brother. You became one of us, Brother Wolf." Tobias bowed his head, humbled. The chief turned to Ayana, who stepped forward and unwrapped the bundle. Inside was a new war lance, not stained by battle, but carved with peace. Eagle feathers woven with olive branches, Apache prayers etched beside words in English. At the spearhead, a single word inscribed in both languages, peace. Takakota held it out. "Today," he said, "we offer you the lance of a peace chief. You will carry this for both our peoples. You will speak with one voice but carry two hearts. And when the time comes, you will not choose one side, you will protect the space between them." Tobias's breath caught. The weight of it wasn't in the wood, it was in the meaning. "I accept," he said simply, taking the lance in both hands. A cheer rose from the children, joined by the elders, joined by the land itself. It was not loud, but it was deep, a sound of healing of old wounds beginning to mend. That night, they lit fires in the fields behind his home. Not for war, but for celebration. Stories were told in Apache and English. Dances performed in harmony, not defiance. Tobias sat beside Ayana, who handed him a small drawing done in charcoal by the tribe's children. It showed two men, one carrying a war lance, the other an olive branch standing between two communities, their arms wide like shields. Around them stood dozens of small figures, children from both worlds, laughing beneath a bright sun. "They wanted you to see what their future should look like," Ayana said softly. Tobias felt the burn of tears unashamed. That night, he stood alone in the field holding both the old lance and the new. One for battle, one for peace, both earned, both deserved. And he swore under the stars and the spirit of everything sacred he would never let either be used lightly. Years passed, but the echoes of Devil's Canyon never truly faded. They lived on, not in blood, but in what came after, in the quiet moments, the gentle ones where peace settled into the land like rain after fire. Tobias Hartwell married a school teacher named Sarah, strong-willed, sharp-eyed, and endlessly kind. She had come west to teach reading and arithmetic to settler children, but quickly found herself just as devoted to the Apache students who joined her little outdoor classroom beneath the cottonwoods. Together, they raised 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, who spoke both English and Apache fluently. Around their dinner table, lessons were taught in 2 tongues. Their children grew up hearing stories not only of cowboys and cattle, but of spirit animals, river ancestors, and the honor of choosing words over weapons. Tobias never left the ranch, but his life expanded far beyond its borders. As federal Indian agent and peace chief, he traveled regularly between tribal councils and territorial governors' meetings. His role was clear enforce treaties, expose corruption, and remind both sides that peace was not just a pause in violence, it was a living thing that had to be protected, nurtured, and passed down. And slowly, the Southwest changed. 17 Apache bands, 3 Navajo clans, and 4 Pueblo communities signed expanded peace agreements. Trade routes reopened, guarded not by soldiers, but by mutual respect. Mixed schools were built, places where children of all backgrounds could sit side by side. Cultural festivals replaced war dances. Markets grew, crafts flourished, and for the first time in decades, people started to trust again. Tobias became a symbol, not of conquest, not of submission, but of unity. He still carried 2 lances. The first, the weapon he'd thrown in Devil's Canyon, was hung on the wall of his study, a reminder of what he'd risked to protect one life. The second, the peace lance, he carried everywhere, not for show, but for purpose. When he stood before a tribal elder or congressional panel, it was always there, gleaming with feathers and olive branches. But it was never power that defined him. It was memory. Every year on the same spring morning, Tobias would rise early, walk past the barn, and follow a quiet trail behind the pasture. There, beneath an old cottonwood, was the well, the same well where it all began. No plaque marked it, no monument stood beside it. just a circle of stones, a rusted bucket, and the cold, clear water that had once saved a stranger's life. Tobias would sit beside it sometimes alone, sometimes with Sarah or his children. He'd run his fingers over the stones, remembering the moment he gave water to a dying man, an Apache warrior the world had already written off. That single act of kindness had spiraled into something far greater than either of them could have imagined. It hadn't changed the world overnight, but it had changed their world. He would tell his children and later his grandchildren empires rise and fall, guns rust, laws fade, but kindness that survives. As the sun rose behind him, casting golden light over the valley, Tobias would whisper a quiet thanks to the land, to the people, to Ayana, wherever he was riding now. He knew peace was fragile. He knew others would try to break it. But he also knew this: they had built something stronger than war, a legacy. One built not on blood, but on a cup of water passed from one hand to another beneath an open sky. This story reminds us that true peace is not won by force, but by courage, compassion, and integrity. Tobias Hartwell's journey shows how a single act of kindness, a cup of water to a stranger, can ripple outward and change the course of history. In a world often divided by fear and prejudice, his choices prove that empathy is stronger than hatred, and that standing up for what's right may cost us, but it also defines us. The legacy we leave behind isn't built by power or violence, but by the bridges we build between people, the trust we earn, and the peace we protect. For the future, this story teaches that justice must walk hand in hand with mercy, and that even in the darkest canyons light can rise if someone dares to carry it.